Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitateh b'tzitzi. Blessed are you, Lord our God, everlasting King, who has set us apart by your established things and charged us to put on the tzitzit. Together. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. I love your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. I come into your holy house, and bow toward your holy sanctuary in awe of you. Lord, I love the house where you dwell, the place where your glory sits. I prostrate myself and bow. I kneel before the Lord my Maker. In your bounty kindness, answer me with the truth of your salvation. For you show your Messiah is true and the answer to all what we seek on your holy Shabbat. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. Va'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'kol nafshecha, u'kol nafshecha, u'kol me'odecha, v'hayu ha'ramim elei, asher Elohim mitzvah, hayom ha'levecha, v'shinantam le'vinecha, v'vivartam le'shiltecha, v'veitecha, u'vletecha, v'derek, u'shaktecha, u'kumecha, u'shaktam u'vletecha, v'hayu letotafot bein einecha, u'kaftam ha'mezuzot leitecha, u'visharecha. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And these words I set up for you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you will speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk in the way, when you lie down, and when you arise. You shall bind them as a sign in your hand and as bands between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and in your gates. What's a gate?
That would be a room.
Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Ya'anenu B'yom Kar'enu Hoshia et Amecha Uvarech et Nachalatecha Ur'em V'nasem Ad HaOlam. Lord, save us. May the King answer us in the day that we call. Save your people and bless your inheritance. Tend them and care for them forever.
Ashrei ha'am she'chachano, Ashrei ha'am she'Adonai Elohim. Happy is the people whose God is us. Happy is the people whose God is the Lord.
Okay, try it again. Ashrei ha'am she'chachano, Ashrei ha'am she'Adonai Elohim.
Happy is the people whose lot is thus. Happy is the people whose God is the Lord.
Happy.
Happy.
Happy is the people whose lives
Happy.
Uval Tzion goeth, Uval Tzion goeth, and to Zion a Redeemer comes. Uval Tzion goeth, Uval Tzion goeth, Uval Tzion goeth, and to Zion a Redeemer comes. Uval Tzion goeth. The bride say come, the one who can hear say come, the one who thirsty can come, drink of the fountain of a Vayikra, Uval Tzion goeth, Uval Tzion goeth, and the Zion of Redeemer comes, Uval Tzion goeth, they will ones who can hear say, come. The one who thirsts can come. And bring of the mountain of a mighty, mighty, mighty tzion go well. Father tzion go well. And the Zion and Redeemer come. Father tzion go well. Father tzion go well. Father tzion go well. And the Zion and Redeemer come. Father tzion go well. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, His holy mountain. Beautiful light, the joy of all the earth. The city of our King is Mount Zion. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, His holy mountain. Beautiful height, the joy of all the earth. The city of our King is Mount Zion. We thought at your loving kindness in the midst of your holy temple. Did we do Elohim Hazeh? We thought of your loving kindness in the midst of your holy temple. Did we do Elohim Hazeh? The Kerem Alecha. God in the border of the sea is our defense. For all the kings assembled there together. We saw and heard in the city of the Lord. God, He will establish her forever. On my hill, the mount of Israel. There I will seek her offering. There the house of Israel will serve. Accept them their gifts and holy things. I will return to Zion. Dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, the city of truth and light. Of the Lord, the holy mountain. I will return to Zion. Dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, the city of truth is Zion. And the mountain of the Lord, the holy mountain. Great is the Lord, and great to be praised. The city of our God is holy mountain. The joy of all the earth, the city of our King is Mount Zion. All of your loving kindness in the midst of your holy temple. Give me new Elohim Hazeh, and Kerem Alecha. We thought of your loving kindness in the midst of your holy temple. Give me new Elohim Hazeh. I will return to Zion, dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, the city of truth is Zion, the mountain of the Lord, holy mountain. God in the holy sea is our defense. All the kings assembled there together. We saw and heard in the city of the Lord. God will establish her forever. We thought of your loving kindness in the midst of your holy temple. Give me new Elohim Hazeh, the Kerem Alecha. Holy mountain. Out in the wilderness, speak to the heart of Zion. She has finished all of her heart service. Nakamu, Nakuami. Make her road, make it smooth. A highway for God in the desert and every valley raised up high. Mountain brought low as the desert sand. Nakamu. Get up, Zion, on the mountain, bearer of good news. Jerusalem, there's a gospel call to do of every Jew. He is your God, and gave away. Do not fear, I'll be naive. And the seven tzion, shout the good news now, Jerusalem. Glory of old, called out in the wilderness. Such as grass, big like flowers, grass will wither and it's loveliness. Namuami. Grass withers, flower fades, when the spirit blows on it. Grass withers, flower fades, but I've got word will forever stand. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Who has marked off the heavens with the distance of his hand? Who has measured down the earth and the mountains in his scales? Here is your God, comfort all my people. The voice called out in the wilderness. Speak to the heart of Zion and Jesus. Her hearts are dead. Not who I make a road, make it smooth. A highway for God in the desert land. Everybody raised up high, found on low as the desert sand, and not a move, not who I am. Get up, Zion, on the mountain, bearer of good news. Jerusalem, there's a gospel, telling you, he is your God, he gave away. Shout the good news now, Jerusalem. Who's measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Who has up in heaven with the distance of his hand? Who has measured the dust of the earth and the mountains in his scale? Here is your God, he made a way there. Here is your God, he made a way there. Here is your God, he made a way there. Not who I am. Zion on the mountain, there of good news. Jerusalem, she bears the gospel, called to do it every Jew. Here is your God, he gave away there. Do not fear of delay. And the seven tzion, I'll leave me. Shout the good news now, Jerusalem, who I be. The splendor and majesty, you are girded with strength. You are clothed in righteousness, Holy One, why did you reign? Rejoice in the Lord, my soul exalts Elohim. Clothed in garments of Yeshua, a righteous robe from my King, from my King, from my King. Clothed with splendor and majesty, you are girded with strength. You are clothed in righteousness, Holy One to live. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, my soul exalts Elohim. Clothed in garments of Yeshua, a righteous robe for my King. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, my soul exalts Elohim. Garments of Yeshua, a righteous robe for my are clothed with righteousness, only one singing with joy. Want to be clothed in our dwelling on high, time decay and destroy the Lord reigns. Reigns, clothed in majesty, clothed and girded himself with strength. In mercy, Yeshua, O Messiah, O Luda Adonai, give him thanks. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, my soul exalts Elohim. Clothed in garments of Yeshua, a righteous robe from my King. From my Hallelujah, hallelujah, Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise God. Praise the Lord, He's on high. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise His name now, above the earth and the sky. Kings of the earth and all nations do, princes and all those who rule. Hallelujah, praise the name of Adonai. Let His name alone be high, His splendor over earth and sky. Hallelujah, 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 Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise Yahweh. Praise the Lord, He's on high. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise His name now, above the earth and the sky. Hallelujah, who harmony, praise Him in the heights we see. All of His angels and hosts above. Yeah, hallelujah, hallelujah. All the stars in their masquerade, the sun and the moon turning up each day. Hallelujah, 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 Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise Yahweh. Praise the Lord, He's on high. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise His name now, above the earth and the sky. Hallelujah, 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 Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise God now, praise the Lord, He's on high. Hallelujah, 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 Hashem Adonai. Praise the Lord, praise His name now, above the earth and the sky.
of the Lord, the consolation of Israel. My eye has seen your Yeshua. Baruch Haba Hashem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes out in the name of the Lord. Sing for joy, Jerusalem. He has taken all your sin. We lift the name of Elohim. In Yeshua all of God is seen, so we'll praise your name forevermore. We'll praise your holy name forevermore. Singing for joy now, Jerusalem. He has taken all your sin. We lift the name of Elohim. In Yeshua all of God is seen, so we'll praise your name forevermore. We'll praise your holy name forevermore. Jerusalem. He has taken all your sin. We lift the name of Elohim. In Yeshua all of God is seen. So we'll praise your name forevermore. We'll praise your holy name forevermore. Sing for joy now, Jerusalem. He has taken all your sin. We lift the name of Elohim. In Yeshua all of God is seen. So we'll praise your name now forevermore. We'll praise your holy name Be seated. Be seated.
Shabbat Shalom. We will be discussing Purim after services. This is Wednesday evening, and we'd like to celebrate. So, after Kaddish, we'll go ahead and talk about Purim. Okay? That's it.
Purim is on Wednesday this year. Wednesday and Thursday. Hey, Daniel.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to be back on Thursday? Are you going to be back on Thursday?
More than likely. Well, Thursday nights is when I see my daughter, but it's usually short and sweet, so I probably will be available about 6. Okay, during the evening.
Purim is one of the only festivals that's like written in the Bible to be 2 days. All the other ones is just 1 day, but Purim is actually written in the scriptures to be 2 days. So we can do it Thursday or Friday.
Turn it on, Mike.
Oh, I did. It's on. We can do it on Thursday or Friday. So we will discuss that.
All right.
Oh, it came undone. It came undone. We're okay. It came undone.
Oh.
Okay.
Now pull that little barrel thing up before you push it in. It's like an air hose.
Yeah.
Don't force it. Look at it.
My hands are.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, you got it.
Oh.
Don't force it.
My hands can't feel too great. I forgot to print the notes out. Niños. I forgot to print the notes out. Okay. Shabbat Shalom. Good Sabbath. Sabbath peace. So, we are in the beginning of the Bible. The beginning of the Bible is not Bereshit, it's not Genesis. For Jewish kids, they start, Jewish education starts in the book of Leviticus, believe it or not. It doesn't start in Bereshit, it starts in Leviticus. So when a little Jewish kid goes into their Jewish education at the age of 4, the very first thing they read, believe it or not, is Vayikra, Leviticus, about offerings and sacrifices. Isn't that crazy? It's crazy. But that's the beginning. And it's the beginning because it's the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story of God and of Yeshua and of the gospel of the kingdom, the whole story begins with sacrifices. It begins with the need for blood. So that's why Jewish kids begin their education in Leviticus. So let's go to Leviticus chapter 1, Vayikra. And I'm going to teach on one word of one verse, and it's the very first word in the book.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, very good one. Say Vayikra.
Especially that Vayikra.
Say Vayikra.
Vayikra.
Vayikra. Va means and. Kara means called. He called. Yikra. El Moshe Vayidber Adonai alav. That's all I'm going to teach on. Just that one phrase in Hebrew. Very first verse. Vayikra El Moshe Vayidber Adonai alav. Now, the commentary by Rashi, Israel's biggest commentator in the scriptures, he said this on And He Called Moshe. This is his commentary on And He Called Moshe. Every time God communicated with Moshe, whether it was represented by the expression Vayikra, that means and he spoke, Vayikra, or Vayamar, and he said, slightly different, and he said, or Vayetzav, and he, quote, commanded, actually he set up or established. It was always preceded by God calling to Moshe by name. Calling. Now this is what I'm going to teach about, is this word calling. If I'm not convinced of anything about the Bible, it's this: that we have screwed up every tiny thing in the Bible.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that I will go to my grave knowing that as fact. Every single concept in the Bible has been changed because the words aren't from the original root Hebrew word. And people just kind of put their own beliefs, meanings, interpretations, whatever, cultural understandings on it. And so it all changes and morphs over time. This is the same thing. This word called, like, you're called. Everybody instantly has the same idea of what that means. God called you. But it doesn't mean what you think it means in Hebrew. It's different. It's very interesting and strange, really, the word called. Every time God spoke to Israel as a nation, the 1 million people that were standing there, God called to Moshe by what?
Name.
By name. In other words, it was personal. It was private. It was personal. He said, Kariya, called Moshe by name, Kariya, from the word kara. It's an expression of affection, closeness. I mean, which is weird, because you go, hey, over there!
No, that's cool.
Which, yeah, it is, but most people think it's distance. Call is distance. Hey, you over there! But it's not. It's face to face. Right. Hey, bro. Face to face, exactly.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, it's an expression of closeness. I'm going to show you this in Hebrew. This is really important. It's the same, you can see the same thing employed by the ministering angels when they address each other. It says in Isaiah chapter 6, Kara, they called to each other. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melo Kol Haaretz Kavodo. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole world is filled with His glory. This is where they're calling to each other. And they're right there next to each other. So why are they calling? Why don't they just go, hey, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. You know, like close. But they don't, they call. And there's a big reason for this, which I'm going to show you. And then it says, He called to him. One might think that they, the rest of Israel, heard the sound of God. But it's not true. Calling to Moshe, preceding the prophecy, Scripture therefore does not say, lo. Doesn't say lo, to him. Right here? And he called to Moshe, and he spoke, Adonai spoke to him. Why does it say lo? That's how you say to him. It doesn't say that. It says alav, which means right up to him. Right up to him. Is that strange? I mean, you'd think call would be distance, but it's not.
You know what's interesting there in alav is the phonetic of the heart is there too. It's not lev, but it's the phonetic.
Phonetically, yes. Phonetically, lev is there. Not with the letters, but because this would be a base. But phonetically, it is lev.
Yeah.
Now, the yod is silent on alav. You'd think it'd be aliv, but it's not. It's alav because the yod is silent. But this means right up to it. God called to Moshe. That's a term of closeness. And he spoke. The Lord spoke right up to him. In other words, nobody heard it but Moshe. Even though it's a bat kol, which means a voice, a big voice, a daughter of a voice, a big voice, a voice from heaven. Nobody heard it except Moshe. Where else does that happen in the Bible? where there's a bot cold from heaven and nobody hears it but one guy? Nope, not Miriam. Really? Right, very good. Saul of Tarsus, Saul. Remember, he was on his way to Damascus, and there was a bot coal, and he's telling the story about what happened. He says, there was a bot coal from heaven, and I'm the only one who heard it. Nobody else heard it. So this is the same exact thing. It's a term of endearment. It's close. It's personal. Even though it seems just the opposite, call. So what we got to do is get our heads wrapped around two opposite things at the same time, which is usually the case in Judaism, in the Bible. It's a guy calling out, proclaiming, and at the same time, a term of endearment that's right in your face. And here's where we can get that from. The word kara in Hebrew, and by the way, there's 2 pages, full pages in the Josephus about this word kara. And it's got a lot of different meanings, but they all sort of feed into one thing. To call upon, to call to invite to a meal. We're going to come back to that. Kara is to invite to a meal. It's a term of endearment, not of a shotgun out into the world like people think. Now, this is why I'm saying this. In normative Christianity, evangelism is literally looked at like a shotgun blast, like a lot of pellets going out. And, that's a good thing, because the more you send out, the more chance you have of getting in, right? Yes? Yeah. So if you put out 1 billion seeds, you're going to have some come back. If you put out 4 seeds, you're going to have so much of a chance of having something occur from that seed. And so it's looked at as a shotgun. But in Hebrew, it's looked at as this. A pointer, a laser point, a pin-pointed activity. Very clear. I'm not pointing above the head. Very clear, very specific, very personal. To call to a meal. Now in 1 Samuel 9:13 and 1 Kings, we're going to look at these, and we're going to come back to it later on also. So if you don't want to look at it right now, you don't have to. 1 Samuel 9. What verse is it? 13. As soon as you enter the city, this is talking to Saul, King Saul, before he's king. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice, bless the Lord for the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited or called will eat. Now therefore, go up, for you will find him at once. How does he translate the word call? Ladies and gentlemen? Do I need to read it again? No? Did you get it? Okay, what word, how is it translated instead of called? Invited. Invited. That is good translation. That's good. That's what we're going to talk about. Invited to a meal. Now in 1 Kings 1, chapter, verse 9, verse 18, etc. I think this is David. 1 Kings 1. What's the verse? 9. Now this is about Adoniah. Adoniah sacrificed sheep and oxen and fatlings by the stone of Zohelet, which is beside En-Rogel, and he called all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But he didn't call or invite Nathan the prophet. He's a bad guy, by the way, this guy, Adoniah. What's the next verse?
41.
18.
And now behold, Adoniah is king, and now my lord the king, you did not know it, and he has sacrificed oxen and fatlings in abundance, and has invited or called all the sons of the king and Abiathar the priest. What's the next verse? 41. doing this, I'm asking you because I don't have my notes. Now Adoniah and all the guests who were with him heard as they finished eating. When Yoav heard the sound of the shofar, he said, "Why is the city making such an uproar?" While he was still speaking, behold, Yonatan, son of Abiathar, the priest came. Adoniah said, "Come in, for you are valiant men and bring good news." Now, where did it say invite in that verse? Huh? The sound of the shofar. The sound of the trumpet. It's the word kara. The call of the trumpet, the call of the shofar. It's not blast, it's call or invite. Here, the invitation is the sound of the shofar. So, this is how we get our head wrapped around two opposing things. Number one, the sound of the shofar goes out, but the blessing for the shofar, is it, blessed are all those who make the sound of the shofar? What is it? Yes. Blessed are all those who hear the sound of the shofar. Kol shofar. Shema ha-kol shofar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shema ha-kol shofar. Blessed are those who hear, not those who make the sound. Who hear it. In other words, it's personal. Everybody doesn't hear it. Only select people hear it. So the invitation is personal. Even though it sounds like a big giant thing, a lot of people can hear it. It's not. It's a big giant thing, only one person can hear it.
So which shofar blast is the invitation of the four?
I don't know. Three. There's three.
Oh, well, that's true.
Teruah, Tekiah, Shevarim. I don't know which one it is. Probably maybe all of them together. I don't know. Yes?
1 Samuel 3, the Lord called Samuel Kara.
Yeah, there's about 150 verses that we could look at that say call, and it's Korah. But I'm trying to pick only the ones that tell us the aspect of this word that we're looking for, that I want to teach you. Then it means to recite or read aloud. When we do the Shema, it's got a name. The portion of the Shema that has all the verses in it and everything, it's called Kriyat Shema. What does that mean?
Calling of the...
Call of the Shema.
Yeah.
To call out the Shema. But remember, it's personal. It's just between you and God.
That's why you close your eyes.
Right, that's why we close our eyes, cover our eyes. Some people do that to make it personal. To be called or named, to bear the name or identity. Now that's that verse that you just read in 1 Samuel 1?
3 verse 4.
1 Samuel 3, it says, and he called his name. There's a lot of verses that say, and they called his name, whatever. You are called by the name, whatever. Lots of verses. And it is always the word Korah. Because it's identity. It's personal. It is personal. Now here's another meaning, and here's where we get really to see why it's personal. It literally means to accost somebody, to get in their face. Now, Gesenius, who wrote the Gesenius, who is German, in the culture of Germany, you don't get in somebody's face in Germany in the 1800s, because everybody is polite and standoffish, and you keep your distance, and you are kind and polite to everyone. It's just very much like America.
Yeah.
But in the biblical culture, you get in somebody's face, and that's a sign of respect. You don't stand off as a sign of respect. You get in as a sign of respect. I remember a long time ago, I can't remember the name of that kosher deli. It was, remember we used to go to El Taco Naso? No. We used to go to El Taco Naso, and right next door was that kosher deli. I can't remember the name.
Where?
It was a woman's name.
Easily.
No, that's it.
Here?
Here.
Not the deli nose.
No.
That wasn't.
It was only open for about a year. And she had on the menu,
Oh, in Coronado?
no, it said on the menu, if you want something, raise your voice and ask for it. That's how we'll know your family. This isn't a kosher deli. Hey, where's my chopped liver? Not, excuse me, could I please have some chopped liver? That's not family. That's not personal. That's not life. That's not heart. That's not, tasty, juicy life. Juicy life is right up in your face. When I went to Israel both times, it was like this. I loved it. All the tourists hated it. Just hated it. They want that distance because they're from America, and in our culture in America, we're used to that. We've worked really hard to create that. But you go to the Middle East, and that disappears. And if they want you to have a relationship with them, they go like this. Come here. Come. Drink some tea. Come. All you're doing is going to buy a chess set carved out of onyx. And they want, come, my friend. Come sit down. Where are you from? Oh, my God, it's wonderful. They want to talk. This is how it is. And this is how God is. And this is my point. I'm going to say it this way just so you can understand what I'm saying. The Jewish God, the real God, is in your face. Whether you want him to be or not. And if you don't want him to be, what Christians say is he's a gentleman and he won't force his way in. Oh, that's nonsense.
Bunk.
That is just nonsense. He is a gentleman. But he's still going to force his way in. He's still going to get to you. Because he loves you. And he wants relationship. And the relationship is face to face. It's not at arm's distance. Hey guys, come to my meal. Come on, my friend. Come into my meal. Kara, I'm calling you individually. And I saw this happen over and over and over. When I was with the priests, with the Kohanim that are working to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, I was with my brother Chaim. And we danced. Well, I danced. He wouldn't dance. But I danced at night about 10, 11, 12 at night at the Wailing Wall with rye bottles and rye and whiskey and wine and vodka and there was something else, brandy bottles, skittering all over the Temple Mount. Not the Temple Mount, but the Wailing Wall Plaza as we danced and sang for hours, sweating profusely because it was Sukkot, it was Simchat Torah, the last Shemini Atzeret, the last night of Sukkot, the day after Sukkot. And they were partying hard. And then, after this, some of the young priests, we were all kind of breaking up, and some of the young priests said, come to my house, come on. And he says it to me and my brother Chaim, and Chaim, he's just like, no. And I was like, yeah, let's do it, come on, let's go. And he said, no, let's go, let's leave. And I'm like, they don't know us from Adam. But that's how it is. Come on, I'm calling you, come on. It was fantastic. To herald, to proclaim, to read aloud. But this is the main meaning. To meet, to encounter, to happen upon. But that literally kind of tones it down. It's like to confront, to get in the face of. That's what kara means. So, can you see why Rashi translated as it was personal? It had nothing to do with anybody else, even though it was to all of Israel. It was just to him. Now, the word karev, which is right after kara in the just saying it's in the Strong's Concordance also. It's the very next verse, and it comes from this root, kara. It's a cherub, karuv. It's the same word. It means to draw near or to approach. The four living creatures, the cherubim, they are right in God's face. It's personal. And they are his chariot. He rides around on them because it's personal.
It's a phonetic there again.
Say it again.
It's a phonetic similarity there with cherubim and karab.
It's the word. The word is.
Is that same word?
Yes. Cherubim is plural of karab.
Spelling is the same?
Yes, that is the word. They are the draw nearers. They are the approachers. They are the right in God's facers. That's why they're called that.
The ones that bring him near.
No.
A corbin? Like a corbin?
Whoa.
I'm sorry, what?
Like a corbin?
No, totally different word. Kol amar kara me'akad. Now this is one of my favorite verses. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 40. I always end up at chapter 40 of Isaiah. Even though my ministry is not based on it, and I don't quote it like when I'm teaching, that sort of thing. It really is the core message of my life, I guess. And this was also the core message of John the Immerser's life. It starts out with Nachamu Nachamu Ami, comfort, comfort my people. But that's not the part that just lights me up. The part that lights me up starts in verse 6, which is this word kara. It says in verse 6, Kol amar, a voice spoke, kara, call, ma'ak ekra. And I said, what do I cry? What do I say? Say! No, call, invite. What do I call? How do I invite? Kol amar, kara, ma'ekra. The voice said, cry out, evangelize. What do I cry out? Now the word kara is the other word for a caller, an evangelist. The word for evangelist is in the very next verse. Mevaseret. Mevaseret. It means a kosher butcher. It's also an evangelist. But the other word for an evangelist is a ekra, a caller, an inviter. So here's what I brought up earlier about Christian evangelism is looked at as a shotgun. Jewish evangelism is not. It's looked at as a laser pointer. Very pinpointed. Because it's personal. It's not a message for everybody. It's for very few.
It's true.
And it's built like that. These are not my words. This isn't something that I came up with. It's not like what I'm saying because I can see that happening. This is what all the rabbis said. Judaism is not for everyone. However, everyone needs to be told. So it says, a voice says, call. And I answered, what shall I call? Here's what you say. It's a weird answer. All flesh is grass, and all of its loveliness, its beauty, is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades. The word of our God stands forever. And before you go any farther, that's the whole message of God. In Judaism, all flesh is grass. All beauty is grass. It's gone. It just goes. What teaches loveliness and beauty? All day, every day.
Hellenism.
Say it loud.
Hellenism.
Right. Hellenism, the way of the Greek, is all about beauty. It's all about loveliness. It's all about, sports with beautiful bodies and acting, philosophy, beautiful minds. It's all about beauty and loveliness. It's flesh.
Surface.
So, if the message is, that's flesh, that's flesh, that's flesh, that's flesh, there's got to be an antidote to it given, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And here's the antidote, the very next verse. Get yourself up on the high mountain, Zion, bearer of the gospel. Who bears the gospel?
Zion.
And what is Zion a code word for? Judaism. Zion is Judaism. It's the temple. It's the cycle of the kosher laws, and the new moon, and the Sabbath, and the festivals, and the sacrifices, and the priesthood, and the cycle of the year that God created, and going up to Zion and back down, up to Zion and back down, where you see the sacrifices, and you see the new moon, and the kosher laws, and the Sabbath, and the festivals. You have to see it. And that's what preaches the gospel. The pictures. So, in this message of, a voice says, hey, call! What do I call? Call this. That's flesh. Here's the answer. Judaism. Every single thing in Judaism is a picture that preaches the gospel. Everything. It doesn't matter what it is. It's given by God, and it preaches the gospel. Instead of a person preaching to a vast amount of people preaching the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's not the gospel.
And be filled with the Holy Spirit. It's a teeny, tiny little part of the gospel, and it's all the wrong words, and it communicates all the wrong stuff, but yeah, it's a tiny part of the gospel. But that ain't the gospel. The gospel is seen as a long narrative story in Judaism. And you have to live it. You have to live that cycle to see Judaism, to see the gospel. Here's the mountain of Zion. Here's the sacrifices, the smoke from the sacrifices. Here's people going up to Zion, and that is Hamlocha, the kingdom. Now that's been since day one of creation, that God created the kingdom. 6 days for man, and then the seventh day is the kingdom, and all of Judaism talks about it. And we're supposed to decode it, and that decoding is the call, the invitation. And very few hear it. And even those who hear it and respond, still not enough, which I'm going to show you. So you have Hellenism equals flesh, grass, and Judaism is the gospel. Mevaseret tzion. Gospel bringer Zion. Get yourself up on a high mountain. Zion, bearer of the gospel. The church doesn't bear the gospel. Who bears the gospel?
Zion.
Zion.
Jews.
Zion. Well, Jews maybe, but more particularly Judaism.
Yeah.
That which God created as his cycles and his pictures. That preaches the gospel. Get yourself, lift up your voice mightily, O Jerusalem, bearer of the gospel. Lift it up, don't be afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. You want to see your God? Look at Zion, and you'll see him.
Good Judaism.
Because you'll see the gospel in the cycle. I just absolutely love these verses. They light me up. Because I never heard this from anybody. But it's really, really clear. Especially in the Hebrew. Okay. Vayikra el Moshe vayidber Adonai alav. God and called to Moshe and said, the Lord, on him, right up to him. Now, let's go to Matthew chapter 21. Or, is it 21 or 22? 22. Matthew 22. Now, in this chapter, Yeshua tells a parable that is everything that I'm saying to you right now. It's basically the whole story of the gospel, narrowed down to just one little story. By the way, I told this story to a Gentile the other day. You should have seen his face. His question was, why does everybody hate the Jews? And I answered him with this parable. And he was like, just sucked in. He's German. He's a German Gentile, and he was just sucked in. And now, all he wants to do is hang out with me and ask me Bible questions. Because I told him this parable in answer to his question, why does everybody hate the Jews? Chapter 22. Yeshua answered and spoke to them again in the parable, in the picture, saying, the kingdom of heaven, stop. What's another synonym for the kingdom of heaven? No?
Day of the Lord.
Day of the Lord. What else? A day. What else?
The day.
The day. What else? Shabbat. What else? How about a number? Give me a number. The seventh day. Good. What else?
7,000. 7,000.
The last 1,000 years. Okay. What else? Millennium. Okay. What else? Say it again. Thank you. Yom Shekulo Shabbat. The day that is all of it Sabbath. The day of the Lord. Okay. When he says kingdom of heaven, that's what he's talking about. That day of the Lord, the kingdom, can be compared to a king, of course, who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent out his slaves to call those who had been invited or called. This is the word kara. And we saw already that the word called can be translated invited in the Tanakh to the wedding feast. And they were unwilling to come. Now, what is this talking about? Let me say it this way. If Yeshua speaks, it's got to be in the Tanakh, right?
Of course.
How do we know that?
He was the Tanakh.
How do we know? Thank you. The Word became flesh. That's how we know that. He was the Tanakh because the Word became flesh. So if it's in the New Testament, you better be able to know where it is in the Old Testament, or else you don't know what he's saying. It's that simple. So here, the kingdom of the day of the Lord is like a wedding feast. Now, the 7 days, a wedding feast is called in Hebrew, Sheva Yamim Yichud. 7 days of the unity. Sheva Yamim Yichud. That's what a wedding feast is called. How long does a wedding feast last?
7 days.
7 days. So he's talking about the kingdom the 7th day. And he says that it's like a king who invites people to that wedding feast. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 9:13. Again, if it's in the New Testament, you better know where it is in the Old Testament, or you don't really understand what's being said. Samuel 9. 9 what? Okay, we read this earlier. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat, for the people will not eat until he comes. Picture Yeshua. The people have been invited to go up to the wedding feast. Where's up? Jerusalem above heaven. The people have been invited to go up to the wedding feast, but they won't eat until he comes, until the Messiah comes, because he must bless. Now, what it says is bless the sacrifice, but we know that means bless God for the sacrifice. Afterward, those who were invited will eat. After he blesses God for the sacrifice, then the people will eat. Therefore, go up, ascend, resurrect, for you will find him immediately. This is one of the verses that Yeshua is quoting here about him being invited to the wedding feast. So they went up to the city. What city? What city?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Where is it? In heaven. As they came into the city, behold, Shmuel was coming out toward them to go up to the high place. Look. He's coming out to meet them, right? These guys came up. This prophet is coming down to meet them. This is like it says in 1 Thessalonians 4:15 through 5:3, that there will be the sound of the shout and the last shofar being Rosh Hashanah, and the dead in Messiah will rise to meet the Lord where? In the sky, in the air. And so we'll always be with the Lord. This is a picture of that. Exactly a picture of that. Now, in 1 Kings 1:9, 19, 41, 49, we read that. That was about the same thing. Call them to the wedding feast. Call them to the feast. Adonia. Called them to the feast. Now, what does Adonia mean? What does Adonia mean? Anybody know? Adonai Yah. Adonai Yah. The Lord Yah. Yahovah. Yah is shortened form of the name of God. Yahweh. The Lord Yahweh is calling people to the wedding feast, to a feast. Not a wedding feast in Adonia's case, but a feast. So it's also a picture of the same thing. God is calling a feast. All right. And then he says, back to Matthew in verse 3, we're going to pick this parable apart. That's what we're doing. Verse 3, and he sent out his slaves to call those who had been invited or called to the wedding feast, and they were unwilling to come. Now remember, he's talking past tense. So, who was sent out to call people to the kingdom of God, the wedding feast, in the past?
The prophets.
Prophets. Anybody else? Apostles. Good. Anybody else? Huh? No, in the past. This is Yeshua talking. He's talking about the past.
Before him.
Before Yeshua. Anybody else? Apostles, prophets. Anybody else? Teachers, evangelists. Anybody else? No. John the Immerser is like in the same time period as Yeshua. This is talking about the Tanakh, like during the time of the Old Testament. Who did this in the time of the Old Testament? You got apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, judges, right? Now, there was a verse I had trouble finding, but I finally found it, thank God. Jeremiah 7. I knew I had read this, I just couldn't find it. And the way I heard it in my head was, rising up early and sending. That's the way I heard it, and that's the way I read it. And I'm talking about years and years ago. And then I found it. Jeremiah 7:25. Since the day that your fathers came out of the land of Egypt, until this day being right before Babylon came and destroyed Jerusalem. So from the time of the Exodus until the time of the destruction of the temple, I have sent you all my servants, the prophets, rising early, daily, and sending them. Since the time of the Exodus until the time of the destruction of the temple, God sent people to go come up, call out the message. What's the message?
God.
Judaism, the kingdom. Judaism. That's the message. Judaism. And in it is seen the gospel. And from the time of the Exodus, God had been sending out messengers to personally call people to it. In Luke 11:49-51, Yeshua says this. He says, the Holy One sent apostles and prophets, and you killed them. Let's go to Luke 11. This is important. The details in it. Verse 49. The wisdom of God said, I will send to them prophets and apostles. Where? Yeah, but where? Where does the wisdom of God say, I will send them apostles and prophets? Where? In the Tanakh. Where? Where does it say? Where does God say in the Tanakh, I will send apostles and prophets to Israel? That's what you should be thinking. Where? Where does the wisdom of God say that?
Kingdom.
No, I mean like where in the Bible? Where in the Bible does God say, I will send apostles and prophets to Israel? Nobody knows? It's got to be in the Old Testament. If it's the wisdom of God. Huh? That's one of about 50 places. Deuteronomy. It's in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus,
Right.
Deuteronomy. It's all
Every
through the
book.
Bible. It's all through
All
the
over the
Tanakh. There's many verses that say where the wisdom of God says, I will send somebody to talk to you, Israel, and you won't listen.
That's what Jeremiah said to her.
Right. Jeremiah's got many of those. So, for this reason, the wisdom of God said, I'm going to send apostles and prophets, and some of them they will kill, and some they will persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets shed since the foundation of the world What does that tell you about prophets?
It's all the way back.
They've been around since the foundation of the world. Who was the first guy? Adam. I bet he was a prophet. Probably.
There were worlds before him too.
Since the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation. Because from the blood of Hevel, wow, there's her first guy. What was that, second generation? Abel?
Right.
Cain and Abel was the second generation from Adam and Eve, right? So from the second generation,
Oh, wow.
we have prophets. Abel, to the blood of Zechariah. This is not the prophet Zechariah. This is a different Zechariah. This is the son of Jehoiada the priest during the time of Hezekiah. They took him and they stoned him in the court of Israel. Sorry, in the court of the priests. Even closer to the house of God. Who perished between the altar and the house of God. Yes, I tell you, he will be charged against this generation. So God's been calling Kara, Kara, Kara since Abel. Think about that. The gospel's been around since Abel, and it's been clear. Okay, let's go back to Matthew 22, verse 4. Again, he sent out other slaves, saying, tell those who have been invited or called, look, I've prepared my dinner, my oxen and fatted livestock are all butchered. That's Mevasevet. A kosher butcher is a gospel bringer of Mevasevet. And everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. When is the wedding feast? In that day. What else? Shabbat. What else? Day of the Lord. What else? The kingdom. What else? The day that is all Shabbat. Come to the wedding feast in the day of the Lord. But that is the day of the Lord. But they paid no attention and they went their way, one to his own farm and another to his business. Now, who's he talking about that didn't pay attention?
They were invited.
Who did God invite?
Well, they were the Jews.
Who did God invite?
The Jews, his people.
Come on, tell me. Jews, period. That's it. The only people that were invited to that feast were Israel.
Right.
Nobody else was invited.
Oh, that's why they hate us.
His people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Nobody else was called. Period.
Right, they're jealous.
And the Jews who were called to this wedding feast were the ones who were supposed to call to the Gentiles.
Right.
But they didn't. And that's why Yeshua came. So that both Jew and Gentile could be called to the wedding feast. Then he said, verse 7. No. Verse 6. And the rest, one went to his farm, one went to his business, and the rest of them seized his servants and beat them and killed them. This is talking about all the prophets from Abel to Zechariah, A to Z. But the king was enraged and sent his armies. Now, who were God's armies? Plural. Who are God's armies? Plural, that he sent. And it says in the Bible, I will send my servant, and then he names the army. Armies. Who was it? Who took Israel out of Israel? Who came into Israel, northern Israel, and got all of the 10 tribes and took them out?
Levi.
Syrians, right?
Huh?
Yeah, most of it. He was trying to leave.
The Syrians or the Greeks?
Not Babylon.
Assyria.
Assyria. Thank you. The Assyrians came and took the northern tribes out. And God says, I will send my servant, Sennacherib, and he will come and he will take you away. And then he again said, I will send my servant, the Assyrians, and they will come and they will drag you away. And they didn't listen, and it happened. Then who came as God's army to take away Judah? Come on, tell me.
Babylon?
Say it loud.
Babylon?
Babylon, of course. And God says, behold Babylon, my sledgehammer, my hatchet, my spear, my bow. I will send them to do my bidding, and they will destroy Jerusalem. He calls them my armies. And that's what he's talking about, the Assyrian invasion and the Babylon invasion. It was God's armies that did this. Verse 7, but the king was enraged and sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. What's their city?
Jerusalem.
Which Jerusalem? Jerusalem above or Jerusalem below? Below. They didn't care about Jerusalem above, which is why they didn't listen in the first place. Verse 8, then he said to his slaves, the wedding is ready, but those who were called or invited were not worthy, or not fit, not kosher. Not worthy is not a good translation, it's actually fit. Go therefore to the main highways, and as many as you find, invite to the day of the Lord, the kingdom. And those slaves went out into the streets and gathered together everybody that they found, both evil and good. And the wedding hall was filled with dinner guests. Who's he talking about here? Gentiles. But remember, it's not like this. Hey, everybody! It's not like that. It's personal. It's individual people. Individually calling. Individually inviting. My favorite, absolute favorite concept of this is, what we're going to talk about in a minute, is the kosher laws. I love it. I just love the concept of the kosher laws because of this. It's a personal invitation. And those slaves went out into the streets and gathered together everybody they found, both evil and good, Gentiles and Jews, and everybody. The wedding hall was filled with dinner guests. But when the king came in to look over the dinner guests, now we've got to pause there. You'd think that God would go, hey, everybody, it's all good, right? But he doesn't. He doesn't. He says, when the king came in and looked over the dinner guests, he saw there was a man not dressed in wedding clothes. What the heck does that mean? What's he quoting in the Old Testament? Not dressed in wedding clothes. There's only one verse that I know of that says that God is clothed in salvation. Have you read that one?
Right.
Not us. God is clothed in salvation. That's what it says. In in 2 Chronicles 6:41. In 2 Chronicles 6:41, it says, God is clothed in salvation. And then in Isaiah 61:10, it says, he will clothe me with the garments of salvation, of Yeshua. Himself, right? He will clothe me with the garments of salvation. He will clothe me with himself. Yes?
Yes.
So obviously, you'll follow this. What is the kingdom? What's another way to say it?
Shabbat.
Day of the Lord, Shabbat, the millennium, if you will. In the millennium, in the kingdom, in the Shabbat of God, there's going to be people who are not dressed in salvation. They're not going to have wedding clothes. They were invited, they were called, they even showed up. They even went to the kingdom. But they're not dressed in God. They're not dressed in salvation. And so what does God say? Now this is, I'm only going to give you my opinion here. I think this is badly translated. Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now I picture somebody grabbing somebody and hog-tying them and throwing them into a furnace. Kind of like the Nazis did. But I don't believe that's what it's saying. The word bind, I don't think it's like that. It's the word deo in Greek, and it means to bind to a religious obligation. What in the Bible, don't think law, think pictures. What in the Bible binds us to a religious obligation? There's no such thing as commandments. I told you not to go there. Don't think law, think pictures. Are there any commandments? Are there any commandments?
Instructions.
No, what are there?
Instructions.
Set up things, establish things. What are the other words for God's things?
Mitzvot.
Instructions, Torot,
Mishpatim,
Mishpatim, judgments,
Hok.
Hok, good, statute. All right, these are things that bind a person only if you're invited. Only if you're invited and you respond to the invitation. You then bind yourself to a, quote, religious obligation. I don't like those words, but, that's what we got. Religious. The word deo means to bind to the Bible. We'll say it that way. To bind to God's set up things, His established things, His, what you call commandments. In other words, the yoke of the Torah, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. The yoke of the Torah is the best thing.
Yes.
To be under the instruction. And you don't have to, but you're invited to. And so in my read, this is just my opinion, but my read is this, when I read this verse. The king said to the servants, teach him Judaism. Teach him Judaism. And then he'll go into the outer darkness in that place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why?
To tell them.
Because he didn't do it. He didn't listen. He got him clothed without salvation in the first place. He ain't going to listen. But God still says, teach him. Teach him. Now, where is this in the Bible? Teach him. Teach him. I'll teach you 7 times more. And you didn't listen. And so I came and I said, I will teach you 7 times more. And you didn't listen. And so I will come and I will teach you 7 times more. Where's that in the Bible?
Isaiah or Jeremiah?
No, Leviticus. It's in Leviticus where it talks about the prophecy of the day of the Lord and the birth pangs. And God beating his children. But the word is teaching. I will teach you 7 times more. I will teach you 7 times more. I will teach you 7 times more. But it's translated punish. And I believe the same thing is happening here. God never punishes anybody. He teaches through the pictures. And if people listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't. If they don't, they're casting away from God in the darkness where there's weeping, crying, and I don't know what gnashing of teeth is. I guess it's, I could have, but I didn't. I guess. I don't know. Because I don't know where that is in the Tanakh. But that's my read on it, so to me that makes a lot of sense. And then he says, after that, verse 14, for many are called, but few are chosen. I know you've heard that phrase, right?
Yeah.
You've heard that phrase?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean anything like what people think it means. What does called mean? What does called mean?
Personal invitation.
Personally invited. Many are personally invited, but few are chosen. Where in the Bible does it say few are chosen? Huh? You don't know? Really?
What is it?
Where does it say in the Bible few are chosen?
Right after many are called.
Wrong. Not right after many are called. Deuteronomy 7, 6-7. It says, I didn't set my love on you and choose you because you were the greatest of people. I chose you because you were the least, the fewest of the nations, the fewest of the people. Few are chosen.
Genesis and Moses.
Few are chosen.
There.
You see, it's so hard to get your head wrapped around what's being quoted because we've heard these misquoted so many times. All he's doing is quoting Deuteronomy 7, 6-7. It goes on a little bit farther than that. He says a little bit more than that. Verse 6, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you. Chosen to be a people for his own possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. The Lord didn't set his love on you or choose you because you were more in number, but because you were the fewest of people. Many are called, personally invited, but few are chosen. Who are the few that are chosen? In this verse. Thank you. Israel. So who are the many that are called?
Christian.
Not Christians.
Nations.
Everybody else?
All the Jews.
Gentiles. So you could read it like this. Gentiles are called, Jews are chosen. You could read it like that, and it makes sense. You got a problem with that?
I just think of the word nation, Jew and Israel is a nation. So
Yeah, but
it's like-
he doesn't call, he doesn't choose any other nations. He chose the nation of Israel, but he called everybody else. And it's personal. It's not a shotgun. The reason I'm saying that this is this. I've heard my whole adult life. And then the gospel shall be preached to all the nations, and then the end shall come. We need to reach all the nations. There are still 17 and a half nations left that we have not reached. We need your money because we need to reach them with the gospel of the kingdom. It's nonsense. The gospel has been preached through Judaism to all the nations. They were invited. They have been invited. They're continually invited. If they respond, they respond. If they don't, they don't. The Jews were chosen. But then, with Yeshua, everybody is called, both Jew and Gentile. Now, I know you've read all these verses about called. Romans 8:28, you could probably quote it. Called according to his purpose, right? You're called according to his purposes, right? It doesn't say that. It says called according to purpose. You've been called according to purpose. Well, what's purpose? What's the big purpose? Judaism. You've been called according to purpose, according to God's purpose, which is Judaism. Romans 11:29. The gifts and calls of God are irrevocable. You've heard that quoted. In fact, some of you have quoted that to me. Michael, you're going to be a rabbi because the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. It's not anything like what it's saying. Who does he call?
Judaism.
Wrong. Who does he call?
Everybody.
All the nations.
All the nations. Who does he choose?
Jews.
Now, when it says quoted, this is quoting a scripture in Psalms that's talking about Israel. And it says, Israel, I called you and I brought you out of Egypt. And now the nations have attacked you. The gifts are without turning. I will never revoke my call on you, Israel, and my choosing of you, Israel. So in this case, it's talking about Israel being called and chosen. And that's in the Psalms. 1 Corinthians 1:24. Let's read that one. So now we're into Christian territory, and you're going to have to change your mind about how you're thinking about some of these verses. Because if you look at it through the lens of knowing what the word kara means, it may change the way you think about these verses, and I hope it does. 1 Corinthians 1:24. But to those who are called, what's another word for called? What's another word for called? Invited. Let's read it like that. But to those who are invited, both Jews and Gentiles, Messiah, the power of God and the wisdom of God. But only to those who are invited. So, with Yeshua, God then invites both Jews and Gentiles. Before, he only chose the Jews. Now, he calls and invites personally both Jews and Gentiles. 1 Corinthians 1:26. For consider your calling, brothers. Wait, I'm going to read it in Christianese first. For consider thy calling, brethren, that there were not many wise among them, according to the flesh, and not many mighty, and not many noble. Consider thy calling, brethren. What the heck does that mean? What does the word call mean? Invite. Think about your invitation, brothers. There weren't very many wise, according to the flesh, And there weren't very many that were strong, and there weren't very many that were noble, had money. When you were called, when you were invited. Now here's the one that I really like. 1 Corinthians 7, 17 through 24. And this ties in with these last ones. Verse 17. Only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has invited each. In this manner let him walk. This is what I tell in all the congregations. Was anybody called, invited, circumcised, or as a Jew? Don't let him become uncircumcised, a Gentile. Has anybody been called, invited as a Gentile? Don't let him become a Jew. I didn't call him as a Jew. I didn't invite a Jew. I invited a Gentile. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. But what matters is what? Torah. Keeping the Torah of God. Both Jew and Gentile. If you're a Gentile, by God be a Gentile. Yeah, but keep the Torah of God. If you're a Jew, by God be a Jew. But keep the Torah of God. Because we were both invited in the same way. And remember, not everybody who gets to the kingdom is going to be dressed right. Ephesians 4:4. There's one hope of your calling. I'm sure you've heard this verse. Okay, hey, let's do an experiment. Mike, what's your calling? I can't hear you.
To do Torah.
Doug, what's your calling?
No possible.
Gloria, what's your calling?
I'm invited.
What's your calling?
To come do Torah.
That's a good answer. I have no clue.
You're honest.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Daniel, what's your calling?
I can't answer that straight.
Can't answer that straight. G, what's your calling?
Learn. Yep.
All right. So hopefully what's happening is you're changing your mind about when people ask you, what's your calling? You used to be able to go, well, my calling is to love God. My calling is as an apostle. My calling is as a pastor. My calling is... But it's not that. It's not a role. What's your invitation? Okay, so I'm going to ask it this way.
To come to the kingdom.
Okay, where is the invitation? Where is the invitation?
Judaism.
Thank you. In Judaism. In Judaism. That's where the invitation is. Consider your invitation. So what are you supposed to think about? Judaism. How is it personal to you? How is it personally relating God to you? How is it the invitation to you personally? How is Judaism a personal invitation? There's one hope of your invitation. 1 Thessalonians 4:7. You're invited to be... Oh, I love this one. Let's go to 1 Thessalonians 4:7. 1 Thessalonians 4:7. And I love this one because now that I understand what call is, I can read it differently, and I think I know what it's saying. I think I do. I hope I do. 4:7. For maybe it's 2 Thessalonians.
You're right.
2 Thessalonians 4:7. Sorry. There is no 2 Thessalonians 4. Oh my goodness.
First Thessalonians 4.
It is 1 Thessalonians 4?
For God has not called us
Okay, thanks.
unclean.
What verse is it?
7.
7. Okay, so I was right. 1 Thessalonians 4:7. For God has not invited us for the purpose of impurity, but in kadosh. Where in the Bible are we invited to be kadosh? Where?
Be ye holy as I am
I can't hear you.
holy. Be ye holy as I am holy.
Be holy as I am holy. Be kadosh as I am kadosh. Okay, that's a good invitation. How about specifics? Where in the Torah are we specifically invited to be kadosh?
Leviticus.
In Leviticus, like what does it say?
That's where it delineates all of the,
Like I can barely hear you.
where Moshe gives them the, comes down from the
All
mountain.
right.
Says, hey.
Best example in the Bible is the kosher laws. Name for me an unclean animal.
Well, that's true, yeah. Right.
Wrong. There's no such thing as unclean animals. Wrong.
To me,
Oh, you're right, because they're not food. They're just not food.
You're still not hitting it.
No.
How many times in Leviticus 11 does it say this is to be unclean? You're invited for it to be unclean, lachem, to you. How many times does it say that?
many.
12 times.
12 times. A dozen times it says, let this owl be unclean to you. Let this bear be unclean to you. Let the snake be unclean to you. Let an ossifrash and an osprey be unclean to you. It's an invitation. If you don't want to do it, you can eat worm burritos all you want. Who cares? God doesn't care. But what he does care about is an owl and a snake and a lizard preaching to you, calling, evangelizing you. That's the invitation. That's the invitation. I am evangelized by Judaism. It preaches to me about God. If it does to you, you're on the right track, you're doing great. If you're just not getting, if it's not preaching, inviting you, and like real specifically, then that thing is the thing you need to have preached to you. You need to figure it out. You need to go look up the Hebrew, study it, get a hold of it, wrestle with it, until it preaches to you. The kosher laws is my favorite example, just because it says in there 12 times, to you, to you, to you, to you, making it personal. That's why it's my favorite, because I'm a dummy and I need something repeated 50 times, or at least 12. So I get that one. It's not always like that in the Bible. Sometimes it's hard to see, but kosher laws are really clear. It's an invitation for you to have that thing be clean, kadosh. And in my opinion, that's what's being quoted here. For God has not called us, invited us for impurity, for unclean, but invited us to clean, kadosh. And all of Judaism is like that. It invites us. It invites us to clean. That's why I like that one so much. And then we got 2 Thessalonians 1:11 says, walk in a manner worthy of your call. What's your call? What's your call? What's your call? Judaism. Walk in a manner worthy of that thing that invited you, Judaism. Yes, sir.
Sorry. You didn't finish the point about where it was in Leviticus, about where it says he calls them to be holy. Where does it say?
I said it several times. It's in Leviticus 11. It says it 12 times. You're invited because it says lachem, to you. This thing shall be unclean to you.
Right, but okay, in 44 it says, for I am the Lord your God, ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy, for I am holy. That's the specific, I guess, for the...
Well, that's that one that
that's what Daniel
that
quoted.
Daniel quoted in Leviticus also. But the better one is the one in Leviticus about the kosher laws, because we're told it 12, 13 times in a row. That these things are unclean to you. These things are unclean. They're not unclean. They're unclean to you. You're invited to have them.
Teach you the wrong picture.
Yes, they're invited. You're invited to have them be unclean to you, if you want. That's our invitation. Okay. I can see how you missed that, because it's an unfamiliar concept.
No, because in Matthew it says, it does say, it says, for the Lord hath not called us unto uncleanness. That's what you're talking about. But the last part says, but unto holiness.
Right, it's the same concept.
Right, but in 44 it actually says,
Yes.
I am holy is you.
Same concept, same exact concept. Okay. Hebrews 3:1. I want to look at this one. Therefore, holy brothers, partakers of a heavenly calling, where's the call?
Judaism.
Where's the invitation?
Judaism.
This calls it heavenly.
Tanakh.
This calls it heavenly.
Right.
In other words, that message in Judaism comes from heaven, and it teaches us, invites us to understand heavenly things.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as being holy. There's no such thing as being holy. You can be holy for a few seconds while you're doing Judaism. You can be kadosh. You can match heaven for a few minutes.
Separate from the world.
But don't think it lasts, and don't think it's like something to be. It's not something
permanent.
to be. It's something to do.
Doing.
And that's Judaism. Therefore, holy brothers, partakers of the heavenly invitation. Think about Yeshua, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, just like Moshe also. And he goes into another point. But don't miss the point of what he's saying. Think about that heavenly invitation in Judaism. It's not physical. It's not law. It's heavenly. It's not law. 1 Peter, oh, I love this one. 1 Peter 2:21, it says, you are called to suffer. You like that one, right? He stares at me. How dare you, boy? Don't you cool birds like that at me. My God.
No, I do not like
No,
that.
I don't like it either. 2 Peter 1. Well, I kind of like it. 2 Peter 1:10. I used to hate it. I don't hate it anymore. I sort of like it. 2 Peter 1:10. Therefore, brothers, he always starts with therefore, but we're not going to talk about what came before. Be all the more diligent to make certain about his invitation. Now look at this. This says calling and choosing. Many are called, many are invited, but what's chosen?
Few.
Few. And who is that? Israel. Make certain about his invitation and choice of you. For as long as you practice these things, you will never stumble. So this is talking about being called and chosen. And then in 2:21, oh yes, lovely, lovely words. 4 would be better. Well, that's not it. 2 Peter. Maybe it's 1 Peter 2.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yes.
It is. Thank you. 1 Peter 2:21.
Right.
Okay. For you have been called, invited for this purpose. Messiah suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps. Yay! We are called to what?
Suffer.
To suffer.
Kind of like the guy who hit himself in the head with a hammer because it felt so good when he stopped.
So we're called. What's the other word for called? Where are we invited to suffer in the Torah? In Judaism? Where? Where are we invited to suffer?
Yes.
Huh. Silent.
Yeah.
Oh well. That's in the New Testament. Where are we invited in the Tanakh to suffer? That's where the invitation is. It's in Judaism. Where in Judaism are we invited to suffer?
I do not know.
You don't know?
It says we can't eat pigs.
All right, I'll say it this way. All the verses in the Tanakh that say,
No bacon. That's
do this ethically. The fool has sex with a whore. Don't do that. Stuff like that. All over
That's in
Proverbs, all over Psalms,
Psalms, yeah.
all over Leviticus and Deuteronomy, Exodus. There's all kinds of, all the ethical, moral words of God. Where you do suffer because you don't get to feed the flesh. That's suffering. That's what it's all about.
Okay.
We're invited to do that, and that's doing Judaism. 2 Peter 1:10, make sure of the call and chosen. I love that one. And then Revelation 17:14. Last one.
I like that Peter says that, you do these things, this Judaism, these pictures. That's what assures you.
Verse 14. This is talking about when Messiah comes back to earth. These will wage war against the Lamb. Now, this is talking about the battle of Har-Megiddo in the 6th year of the birth pains. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called, kara, and chosen, and emunah, faithful. They're called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw, and it goes on to another concept. So at the very, very end of the book, you have the same thing. That the ones that are with Messiah are called. Who's that?
The Jews.
No,
No, everyone.
Who's called? Every, just to say Gentiles. Keep it simple.
The nations.
And who are chosen?
Jews.
Israel, Jews. So many are called, everybody, and it's personal, and few, the Jews, were chosen. Very few. So it sounds like a shotgun and a laser, but it's not. They're both lasers. The invitation is not in Christianity, it's in Judaism. And it's given to everyone. You just got to hear it. And you got to do it, respond to it. And I don't mean do the law. I mean study the words, figure out what it's saying, and then do it to learn from it. Do the, quote, law. It's not law, it's pictures. To learn from it. And as long as you're doing that, basically what we're doing is assuring our placement in the kingdom. I mean, we know we're going to the kingdom. I'm talking about assuring our placement there. Are you going to be great, or are you going to be tiny in the kingdom? And if you don't care, that's not very smart. Because there's going to be great in the kingdom, and there's going to be least in the kingdom. And there's a huge sliding scale between that. So what we're doing is growing in rank as we do Judaism to learn from it. You're growing in rank in the kingdom. Not here, nobody cares here. Nobody cares. But in the kingdom, you're growing in rank. We don't do anything. Nobody cares. You can have all the Bible knowledge in the world. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Not even believers. But in the kingdom, God cares. And the more you know from the scriptures, from doing, the higher our rank is going to be. And that's what we're working for. We're working for Shabbat. Okay, let's pray. Lord, thank you for inviting us from the very beginning. From the very beginning, from the very first Torah instruction you gave, from the very first hope, statute you gave, from the very first mishpat, judgment you gave. You were teaching your kingdom, showing your kingdom, announcing your kingdom, preaching, evangelizing your kingdom. The day of the Lord. I thank you for calling to more and more people for us to talk to, for us to kara and invite through Judaism into your kingdom. I ask that you teach us more and more, and teach your body more and more, and give your body more and more revelation. In the name of Yeshua. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Let's do Kiddush, please.
You come over here to this table.